I found the messages because our internet went down. That sounds stupid, but it's true. My wife had left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she ran out to pick up groceries. I was trying to check the router instructions in her email because mine wouldn't load. We'd been married 11 years. We have a son. There was absolutely nothing dramatic about that afternoon. A half-cut loaf of bread on the counter. My coffee going cold. Rain tapping against the window. Then a message notification slid across the screen. Her friend Mara. He can't ever know the truth about the child. I actually stared at it for a second because my brain refused to attach meaning to the words. I remember reading it twice, then 3 times. My first thought was honestly that maybe they were talking about someone else. I clicked. And there it was. A thread stretching back months. My wife writing things I still can't unread. How to hide dates. How to keep me calm. How. He loves that boy too much to ask questions. Until that moment, I thought my life was ordinary in the best possible way. We met in our 20s. She was loud, warm, impossible not to notice. I was the quieter one. She made me feel chosen. That mattered more than I understood at the time. Our son was born 5 years after we got married. The day he was born I cried so hard the nurse laughed at me. I held him and felt this terrifying, immediate love. The kind that rewires you. Suddenly every decision I made had his face attached to it. We bought a small house. We fought over money, over laundry, over whose turn it was to wake up at night. Normal marriage stuff. Real life. I honestly thought surviving the boring parts meant we were solid. Looking back, maybe there were things I dismissed. She got weird whenever people talked about timelines, when we started trying, when she got pregnant. Tiny hesitations. Quick subject changes. I noticed them. And because I trusted her, I explained them away for both of us. About a year before I found the messages, something had already shifted. She started guarding her phone. Not in a cartoonish way. Nothing obvious. Just little things. Turning the screen face down. Taking calls outside. Smiling at messages and then looking guilty when I walked into the room. I asked her once if everything was okay. She laughed and said, "You're becoming paranoid." That word stuck to me. Paranoid. So I did what a lot of husbands probably do. I doubted myself instead of doubting her. I told myself she was stressed. Her mother was sick that year. Work had been brutal. Our son had started school and was struggling. There were 100 reasons for distance. But intimacy changed too. She became physically present and emotionally somewhere else. She'd let me hold her, but it felt like holding someone who had already left the room. I noticed. I ignored it. I thought love meant patience. I thought trust meant swallowing the feeling that something underneath our marriage had started moving. After reading those first messages, my hands went cold. I scrolled higher. Mara wrote, "Are you sure he never counted the dates?" My wife answered, "He was too happy. He didn't think like that." I felt something inside me drop. I kept reading even though every line made me feel physically sick. There was another message. "I told you it happened once. It was before I knew. I chose my marriage. I chose stability. That matters too." My vision actually blurred. I had to sit down. I remember hearing our son upstairs in his room, humming to himself while building something with blocks. That ordinary little sound made the whole thing feel unreal. I started doing math in my head. Our son had been born a little early. That's what doctors said. That's what she said. Suddenly years of certainty started collapsing into numbers, dates, weeks, calendar pages. And the worst part was I still wanted it to be a misunderstanding. I wanted words to mean something else. She came home 20 minutes later. I was sitting exactly where she left me. Her laptop still open. She knew immediately. I saw it happen in her face. That split second when color drained out of her skin. "What did you read?" she asked. Not "what are you doing?" Not why are you in my messages? Just that. What truth about the child? I said. My voice didn't even sound like mine. She put the grocery bags down very carefully. Like sudden movement would make everything explode. It's not what you think. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I couldn't believe human beings actually say that. Then tell me what I'm supposed to think. She started crying immediately. I hated that. Not because tears are manipulative by themselves, but because suddenly I felt like I was the one who had to manage the room. She kept saying, "Please don't do this in front of him." And that sentence, "in front of him," felt like someone twisting a knife. We went into the bedroom and shut the door. I asked one question. Is he my son? Silence. I will never forget that silence for as long as I live. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried into both hands. I could hear our son downstairs asking if we were okay. I asked again. Is he my son? She finally said. I don't know. I actually stepped backward. My legs felt weak. What do you mean you don't know? She told me there had been someone else. A coworker. A stupid mistake, that was the phrase she used. One night after a conference. Too much wine. Regret immediately afterward. Then she found out she was pregnant. We were trying already, she said through tears. I thought. I hoped. You hoped what? That it was yours. The room felt smaller and smaller. 11 years of marriage suddenly rearranged themselves around one sentence. I don't know. I said things I'm not proud of. I shouted. I slammed the dresser so hard a picture frame fell over. I remember saying, You let me build my entire life inside a lie. She kept repeating that she loved me. That almost made me angrier. Because love was exactly what she used to keep me standing there. I asked if the other man knew. She said no. I asked if Mara was the only person who knew. She hesitated. That hesitation destroyed something else. Her mother knew too. For years. I felt humiliation so sharp it almost felt physical. Family dinners. Holidays. Birthdays. People smiling at me. Passing me potatoes. Asking me how work was. And somewhere in the room there had been a secret with my name on it. I remember sitting on the floor because I suddenly couldn't stay upright. She knelt in front of me, crying, touching my arm. I pulled away. I couldn't bear being comforted by the person who had just detonated my life. That night I barely slept. I sat in the living room while the house creaked around me. At about 2 in the morning our son came downstairs. Hair messy. Half asleep. He climbed onto the couch beside me and leaned against my shoulder. Are you sad? He asked. That nearly broke me more than the confession itself. Because the answer was yes. But not in a way a child could understand. I told him I was just tired. He fell asleep against me. And I sat there thinking something monstrous. What if he isn't mine? The second that thought entered my head, I hated myself. Because I knew every fever, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every first day of school. I knew how he laughs when milk comes out of his nose. I knew he hates thunderstorms. Love doesn't disappear because biology gets complicated. But pain doesn't disappear either. That contradiction almost tore me apart. The next day she wanted to talk. Calmly. I didn't know there was a calm version of that conversation. She said she never told me because after he was born, she was sure enough. He looked like me. He smiled like me. He became mine in every practical way. In every practical way, I repeated. She started crying again. She said she was terrified I would leave. I said, You took away my right to decide. That was the part she never seemed to fully understand. It wasn't only the affair. It was the years. Every day she let me believe we stood on shared truth while she privately managed reality. Then she said something I still hear at night. Does blood really matter after all this time? I know she meant it emotionally. But in that moment it felt cruel. Because blood wasn't the issue. Choice was. Trust was. Agency was. And all of that had been stolen quietly. Her mother called me that evening. I almost didn't answer. She said, "Please don't destroy your family over one mistake." That sentence made me feel cold. One mistake. Not 11 years of silence. Not watching me love that child while holding a secret behind my back. One mistake. I asked how long she had known. Since the pregnancy. I couldn't even speak for a second. "So you watched me become a father and said nothing?" She started crying too. Everyone was crying except me. I felt strangely empty. She said they thought telling me would only create pain. That was when I realized something ugly. They had protected stability, not truth. They had decided what I could emotionally survive without ever asking me. After that call, I locked myself in the bathroom and threw up. Not from anger. From the sheer violence of having reality rewritten while everyone around me acted like survival should make me grateful. A week later, we did the DNA test. Those 7 days were some of the longest of my life. I used to think people were being dramatic when they said time could physically change shape under stress. It can. Every hour stretched until it felt hostile. I went to work because I didn't know what else to do. I sat through meetings and couldn't follow basic conversations. People would ask me questions and I'd realize halfway through their sentence that I had no idea what they'd been talking about. I'd drive home and sometimes not remember entire parts of the route. At home, everything felt distorted. My wife kept trying to talk. Sometimes apologizing. Sometimes explaining details I never asked for. Sometimes trying to act normal, which somehow hurt even more. She would ask whether I wanted dinner, whether I needed anything from the store, whether we could sit down later. That ordinary domestic language felt unbearable. It was like the walls of our house hadn't gotten the message that our life had split open. And our son noticed. Kids always do. He started watching us more carefully. Asking why Mom cried. Asking why I slept on the couch. Asking why nobody laughed at dinner anymore. I told him grown-ups were dealing with stressful things. I hated hearing myself say it because it sounded thin and cowardly. The day of the test, we barely spoke in the clinic. The woman behind the desk had no idea she was watching a family standing on the edge of something irreversible. She smiled, handed us forms, asked for identification. I remember thinking how obscene normal politeness felt in that moment. They swabbed my mouth. Then his. He looked confused but calm. He asked if it was like a science experiment. I told him yes. I smiled while saying it. That smile cost me more than I can explain. Then we waited. Every morning I checked my email before I was fully awake. Every vibration of my phone made my heart jump. I barely ate. I slept in broken pieces. I started imagining futures I didn't know how to survive. And when the results came, I opened them alone in my car in the parking lot outside work. Probability of paternity, excluded. I stared at that word for a long time. Excluded. Such a sterile, technical word. It looked harmless. Administrative. But it landed like a physical blow. My chest tightened so suddenly I thought I might actually pass out. I didn't scream. I didn't hit anything. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles hurt. Then I started crying so hard I had to lean forward because I couldn't breathe properly. Not because I had stopped loving him. That's the part people misunderstand. I cried because I loved him exactly the same. And suddenly I had nowhere to put the grief, nowhere to place the betrayal, nowhere to set down the love without breaking something else. When I got home, she knew. She was standing in the kitchen when I walked in. She took one look at my face and started crying before I said a word. I remember how absurdly ordinary the room looked. The dishwasher was running. There were apples on the counter. Our son was upstairs watching cartoons. And there I was holding a piece of information that had changed the structure of my entire life. It came back negative, I said. That was all. She collapsed into a chair like somebody had cut the strings holding her upright. Then came the apologies. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this." Over and over again. Same words. Same broken voice. And the thing that makes this harder to explain is that I believed her. I believed she was sorry. I believed she had lived with fear. I believed she had probably hated herself at times. None of that made the damage smaller. I asked her the question I had been carrying for days. "Were you ever going to tell me?" She cried harder. "No." That honesty hurt more than another lie would have. "No," she said. "I thought if enough time passed, it would stop mattering. I thought once he got older, once we became a real family, I thought maybe it would just become irrelevant." I remember staring at her. "A real family?" She looked horrified the second she said it. "That's not what I meant." "But that's what you said." And what I heard was even worse. That there had been a version of us built partly out of hope and partly out of concealment. That every birthday, every Christmas morning, every school photo had been layered over something she privately managed. I said, "It mattered every single day. I just didn't know it." For weeks after that we lived like strangers who knew too much about each other. I couldn't touch her. I couldn't even stand in the same room for long without feeling a kind of internal pressure, like my body itself wanted distance. But with our son I tried. Homework at the kitchen table. Packing lunches. Bath time. Bedtime stories. Soccer practice. And every normal moment became both precious and almost unbearable. I became obsessed with tiny details. The shape of his hands. The way he squints when he's concentrating. The way he laughs too hard at jokes that aren't funny. The little scar near his knee from falling off his bike. I would look at him and feel love so fierce it hurt. Then immediately after, grief. Then guilt for grieving. Then shame for feeling guilty. It was emotional whiplash every day. At night I would lie awake asking myself impossible questions. Was I mourning a biological truth? Or was I mourning the version of myself who thought he understood his own life? And maybe the worst part was this: I started doubting memories. Not because they became fake. Because they stayed real. That's what broke me. The first time he called me Dad was real. The nights I stayed up with him when he had fevers were real. Teaching him to ride a bike was real. Him falling asleep on my chest during thunderstorms was real. None of that vanished. But now every memory had a shadow standing next to it. And I had no idea how to live with both. People started noticing eventually. There's only so long you can walk around looking like somebody has been hollowing you out from the inside before people start asking questions. Friends would say, "You okay?" Coworkers would ask if I was tired. My sister asked if I was sick because I had lost so much weight. I learned very quickly how exhausting pretending is. Just stress. Work's been rough. Not sleeping well. Those became my automatic answers. What I never said was that I had started waking up every morning with panic already in my chest. Not anxiety in the abstract. Physical panic. Like I had opened my eyes and my body had remembered before my mind did. There were days I would sit in the parking lot outside my own house and physically could not make myself go inside. One afternoon I stayed there for almost 20 minutes. Engine off. Hands on the wheel. Just staring. That was the moment I realized I needed help. So I started therapy. I didn't go because I believed therapy would fix anything. I went because I was starting to scare myself. The therapist asked me in the first session what I was grieving. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Then finally I said, "I don't know which version of my life was real." That was the first sentence that felt honest. Because grief wasn't simple. I wasn't just grieving the affair. I wasn't just grieving trust. I was grieving certainty. I was grieving chronology. I was grieving the old version of myself who thought he knew what had happened in his own marriage, in his own home, in the years that made him a father. My wife wanted counseling together. At first I said no. Then I agreed because some part of me still wanted to understand whether there was anything left to salvage. For 3 months we sat in a quiet room with soft lighting and carefully chosen words and tried to dissect what had happened. She talked about fear. About shame. About panic when she found out she was pregnant. About convincing herself she was protecting everyone. I talked about humiliation. About betrayal. About feeling like every memory had become unstable. Sometimes the counselor would ask what rebuilding trust would look like. And I genuinely didn't know how to answer. Because trust wasn't broken in one event. It had been managed around me for years. That's a different kind of wound. One afternoon in therapy, my wife said, "I never stopped loving you." And I believe that too. That was part of the tragedy. Because love wasn't absent. Love had simply not been enough to make honesty possible. That realization did something permanent to me. By the end of those 3 months, I understood something I had been resisting. I loved my son. I could still care about the woman I married. But I no longer knew how to live beside the person who had built our marriage around concealment. Love survived. Safety didn't. And once safety goes, everyday life becomes exhausting in ways outsiders don't see. Even silence becomes work. I moved out 8 months after I found the messages. Not far. 10 minutes away. That part mattered to me. I didn't want distance from my son. I wanted distance from the constant pressure of living inside the ruins of something while pretending it was still standing. I found a small apartment. Nothing special. Plain walls. Cheap furniture. Half-empty rooms. The first night there felt brutal. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed listening to unfamiliar silence, and realizing that for the first time in over a decade I was sleeping somewhere my son wasn't. That hit harder than I expected. The hardest conversation of my life was explaining separation to him. We sat together on the couch. My wife and I had agreed beforehand on what to say. Keep it simple. Don't burden him with adult details. Don't make him choose emotional sides. He looked from me to her with that serious expression kids get when they already know something bad is happening. I told him I was going to live in another place nearby. He asked, "Did I do something wrong?" That nearly stopped my heart. I pulled him into my arms so fast I almost scared him. "Never," I said. "Not even a little. This is grown-up stuff. It has nothing to do with you." He cried. Then she cried. Then I cried. And afterward I went into the bathroom and sat on the floor because I thought I might actually break apart. That was the clearest truth left in my life. Whatever happened between adults, he was never the problem. The practical side of separation was strangely exhausting. School pickups. Drop-offs. Soccer practice. Doctor appointments. Whose weekend? Whose holiday? Who keeps which clothes? Who remembers permission slips? People talk about emotional devastation, but they don't always talk about the endless administrative grief of reorganizing a family. My wife and I are civil now. Sometimes even gentle. There are moments when we can talk about school or schedules or funny things he said without tension. And then there are moments where I catch a look, or hear a certain phrase, and the old fracture opens again. The distance between us feels geological now. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just ancient layers of pressure and silence, and things buried too deep to excavate safely. I still haven't told most people why we ended. A few know. Most don't. I couldn't bear the idea of my son becoming gossip before he's old enough to understand his own story. That matters to me more than vindication. Sometimes people ask whether staying quiet protects her. Maybe partly. But mostly it protects him. And that secret, the one I never chose, still shapes the way I move through the world. It affects what I say. What I don't say. Who I trust. How long it takes me to believe people when they promise honesty. It turns out betrayal doesn't only change your relationship with the person who lied. It changes your relationship with reality itself. It's been 2 years now. Long enough that the sharpest edges don't cut me every day. Not long enough that it feels finished. I still hear that message in my head sometimes. He can't ever know the truth about the child. The thing that keeps haunting me is how ordinary that afternoon was. Rain on the window. Cold coffee. A half-finished loaf of bread. Nothing cinematic. No dramatic music. No warning. Just one sentence sliding across a screen and suddenly the entire architecture of my life rearranging itself. The worst part is this: they were wrong. I do know. And knowing didn't make me stop loving him. That's what nobody seemed to understand when all of this first exploded. People act like biology should automatically answer emotional questions. It doesn't. He still runs toward me when I pick him up. He still climbs into bed with me during thunderstorms. He still calls me first when he's scared. He still tells me long, terrible jokes with punchlines that don't make sense. He still asks for the same bedtime story and corrects me if I skip lines. That's my boy. Whatever a test says, that's my boy. But I'm not going to pretend knowledge doesn't change things. It changed the internal shape of memory. Now when I think about the day he was born, I remember my love, but I also remember the lie I didn't know I was standing inside. When I think about family holidays, I also remember there were people in the room carrying information I didn't have. When I think about trust, it no longer feels innocent. That's what lasted. Not constant anger. Not daily hatred. Something quieter. A permanent rearrangement. I trust slower now. I pay attention when something feels off. I don't automatically explain away the small moments anymore, the pauses, the hesitations, the tiny fractures in a story. For a while I hated that about myself. It felt like damage. Maybe it still is. But maybe it's also survival. The truth is I still don't fully know what forgiveness means here. I don't fantasize about revenge. I don't spend my days wanting to punish her. I mostly feel tired. Sad sometimes. Tender sometimes. Angry in sudden flashes when memory catches me off guard. And occasionally I still grieve the man I was before all this. The man who believed love and honesty naturally lived in the same house. Maybe that's the part one never fully processed. Not the affair. Not even the DNA result. The fact that someone can love you, build a life with you, watch you become a father, watch you trust them completely, and still choose silence every day. If anyone reading this is carrying a feeling that something doesn't add up, I'm not telling you to panic. I'm not telling you to accuse. I'm only saying this: don't ignore yourself as completely as I did. Sometimes the thing that feels small is only small because you haven't seen the whole shape of it yet. And some ordinary afternoons divide your life into before and after forever.